I have helped my parents and brother my whole life, but they transferred all the inheritance to my golden brother. So, my name is Zach. I am 36 years old, and honestly, I do not even know where to start because this whole story just feels like the buildup of my entire life. Since I was a teenager, I have been working, helping out at home, and basically sacrificing whatever dreams I had so my family could be comfortable. I guess some people might say that is just part of being in a family, but it always felt a little different for me. I was never treated like an individual with my own path. I was more like a backup plan, the safety net, the guy who would make sure everything stayed afloat no matter what happened. And that is mostly because of my younger brother, Brandon. Brandon was the star. Always had been. He was the golden boy, the one my parents bragged about to everyone they met. Brandon made varsity football in high school. Everyone had to hear about it. Brandon got into a decent college, even though he barely graduated. Champagne corks were flying. Meanwhile, I was over here holding down a part-time job at the grocery store at 16 to help pay the electric bill because dad got laid off and mom's hours got cut. No big celebrations for me. Just a lot of quiet nods and, once in a while, a tired, "Thanks, Zach." I got used to it, or at least I thought I did. You tell yourself it is not a big deal, that you are doing the right thing, being the responsible one. But man, after a few years, it starts to wear you down. Especially when you realize you are the only one making sacrifices while your brother gets to chase whatever shiny thing catches his eye. I stayed local for college, went to a state school so I could live at home and help out, even when I had a scholarship offer out of state. Brandon? Oh, he picked the expensive private school 2 states over because it had better vibes, and somehow, the family scraped together every penny to make it happen. And when he inevitably flunked out after 2 years because he spent more time at frat parties than in class, guess who helped cover the loans? I did. I picked up a second job, working nights as a line cook after my day shift at an insurance office, just to help my parents keep up with the payments. Not that Brandon ever said thank you. Not that anyone really did. I was supposed to be grateful, you know? Grateful that I had a family. Grateful that I had a roof over my head. Even if that roof was crumbling most of the time because nobody but me seemed interested in fixing anything. I patched holes. I mowed the lawn. I figured out how to fix the plumbing after Dad decided he was too old to crawl under the sink. I became the handyman, the emergency fund, the therapist when Brandon crashed his car drunk and needed someone to talk to before facing Mom and Dad. And the funny thing is, it was never framed like I was doing them a favor. It was just expected. Like breathing. Like eating. Zach will take care of it. Zach will figure it out. Zach will fix it. I think the thing that really opened my eyes was last Christmas. Brandon had moved back in after losing yet another job. He blew through his savings buying a motorcycle he could not afford. And surprise, surprise, it got stolen because he parked it in a sketchy part of town overnight without even locking it up. He was sitting on the couch playing video games when I walked in from a 12-hour shift, shoulders slumped, smelling like printer toner and cheap coffee. And he had the nerve to ask me to grab him a soda from the fridge. No please. No acknowledgement of the fact that I was the one keeping the lights on. Just this lazy, entitled smirk like he was royalty and I was his butler. That night, lying awake in my childhood bedroom that still had glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling because I never had time to redecorate, I realized that nothing was ever going to change unless I made it change. They were never going to wake up one morning and see all the things I had done for them. They were never going to say, "Hey Zach, maybe it is time you got to chase your own dreams." They were just going to keep taking until there was nothing left. And maybe that is on me. Maybe I trained them to be that way by always saying yes, by never putting myself first. But damn, it still hurts to realize that love, real love, should not come with strings attached like that. Since I was 14, I have been working pretty much nonstop because there was never really another option for me. It all started with mowing lawns around the neighborhood for 20 bucks a yard, pushing a battered old mower that my uncle gave me after it barely survived his own backyard battles. I would go door to door after school and on weekends, hauling that thing around in the sticky summer heat, soaking through my shirts and ruining more than one pair of sneakers. 20 bucks might not sound like a lot, but when you are a kid and your parents are already hinting that you should be pitching in for groceries, it felt like winning the lottery every time someone said yes. As I got older, the lawns turned into something more serious. When I turned 16, I landed a job in a local store's warehouse, which basically meant long hours of unloading trucks, stacking boxes, and getting yelled at by the floor manager for taking too long, even though we were always short-staffed. The pay was not great, but it was steady, and I knew better than to complain. After a while, that warehouse job was not enough to cover everything I needed, especially with college looming in the distance and my parents making it pretty clear that if I wanted to go, I had better figure it out myself. So I picked up a second gig delivering pizza at night, weaving my beat-up Corolla through endless streets, dropping off lukewarm pies to customers who usually tipped with pocket change and the occasional awkward comment. Sleep basically became a luxury I could not afford. Most nights, I crashed for 4, maybe 5 hours if I was lucky, sometimes just leaning the seat back in my car for a quick nap between shifts or classes. College was this frantic blur of lectures and study sessions where I mostly survived on energy drinks and whatever snack I could grab between stops. Half the time, I ate in my car, balancing greasy paper bags on my lap, trying not to spill anything on the textbooks I always had piled in the passenger seat. I was exhausted all the time, like there was this permanent buzzing under my skin, but quitting was never even a thought. I knew no one was coming to save me, no magic scholarship or wealthy relatives showing up to pay my tuition. It was just me, my stubbornness, and the next shift waiting to start. Somehow, somewhere between the early morning alarms and the late-night deliveries, I found myself working part-time at a local car service shop too. I had always liked tinkering with machines, and the manager took a chance on me after I wore him down with weekly visits asking for a job. At first, I did the grunt work: oil changes, tire rotations, basic inspections. Nothing glamorous, but it paid better than pizza tips, and I was learning something real, something useful that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I was building towards something bigger. Every dollar I made either went straight to tuition, textbooks, gas for the endless miles on my car, or back to my family when they needed it. There were no vacations, no new clothes unless absolutely necessary, no nights out like my classmates loved posting about online. My life was a straight line made of work, exhaustion, and the desperate hope that one day all the grinding would pay off. While I was working myself into the ground just to stay afloat, I was also the kid wearing old jackets that barely fit, the cuffs always a little too short, the fabric thinning at the elbows, and the zippers that never quite zipped all the way up. I would pull the jacket tighter against the cold and pretend it did not bother me, even though I could feel every icy gust like it was slicing through me. Food was not much better. There were stretches where I was malnourished without even realizing it at first, living mostly on dollar menu items, clearance rack granola bars, and whatever free leftovers I could snag from the pizza place if the manager was feeling generous at the end of the night. One of the worst moments was when I had the chance to go on a college trip to Washington, D.C., a program I had been dying to be part of since high school, the kind of thing that could have made a real difference for someone like me trying to break out of the endless cycle of just barely getting by. I scrimped and saved every penny I could, skipping meals, passing up every little thing that might cost money. But even after months of trying, I just could not make the numbers work. I remember sitting in the parking lot after my shift one night, staring at the trip registration form in my hands, knowing I was going to have to let it go. It felt like something inside me cracked a little that night, like all the sacrifices I had been making still were not enough, and maybe they never would be. The part that really stuck with me, the part that still stings if I let myself think about it too long, is that about a year later, my parents paid for Brandon to take a trip to Europe without blinking. It was not just a short thing either. It was a whole summer program through his college, some cultural exchange thing in Italy and France, and they paid for all of it. Flights, tuition, spending money, even upgraded luggage because Brandon deserved to travel in style. And as if that was not enough, around the same time, they also shelled out $5,000 for him to get new braces after he decided his smile needed a little work. I stood there in the living room the day they told him, watching my mom beam like it was Christmas morning, while I pressed my tongue against my own crooked teeth, the ones that had been a source of quiet embarrassment since middle school, the ones they always said we could not afford to fix. They never offered to help me with braces. Not when I was a teenager getting teased for my teeth. Not when I finally asked quietly if there was anything we could do about it. And certainly not after I grew up and stopped asking, because the answer was always some version of not now. Maybe later, we cannot afford it. Meanwhile, Brandon flashed his new perfect smile across every social media post, every family gathering, every holiday card. It was just another reminder that in our house, the rules were different depending on who you were, and I had drawn the short straw without even realizing it until it was far too late to change it. When my father needed heart surgery, there was never even a question in my mind about what I had to do. I was just one step away from finishing my engineering degree, something I had poured years of brutal work and sleepless nights into. But when the hospital bills started piling up and the insurance company started throwing around words like pre-existing condition and partial coverage, it became clear that someone had to step up. That someone, as always, was me. I dropped out of school right before my final semester, right before the moment when all that grinding and sacrifice might have finally paid off, because my family needed me more than I needed a diploma at that point. I spent every penny of the $19,000 I had managed to save over years of lawn mowing, warehouse hauling, pizza deliveries, car servicing, and scrimping by on secondhand clothes and instant noodles. $19,000 that I had imagined one day, using to set myself up in a decent apartment, maybe get a better car, maybe just breathe a little without the constant weight of survival pressing down on me. I handed it over without hesitation because this was my dad, and no matter how tired and bitter I felt sometimes, I still loved him, and I could not imagine standing by and doing nothing. Meanwhile, Brandon, in typical Brandon fashion, dropped out of his expensive private university around the same time, but not because of any family emergency or financial crisis. No, he left because of what he called a mismatch of visions with professors, which, when you cut through the flowery language, meant that he did not like being told what to do and got bored when the classes got hard. My parents barely blinked at his decision. They did not lecture him about responsibility or ask him what he planned to do next. They just nodded and said they understood that sometimes the academic environment was not a good fit for everyone, that he would find his own way eventually. So while I was emptying my bank account and shelving my dreams to make sure Dad could stay alive, Brandon was moving back home without a degree, without a plan, and somehow still getting treated like the golden boy who just needed a little more time to bloom. I tried not to resent him, I really did, but it was hard not to feel that bitter twist in my gut when I thought about everything I had given up and everything he was still being handed without even asking. It was just another reminder that no matter how hard I worked or how much I sacrificed, in this family, there would always be two different sets of rules. After I dropped out of college and the hospital bills were paid, I found myself with nothing but a worn-out car, a drained bank account, and a desperate need to start over. I ended up taking a job as an HVAC installer, even though I barely knew what I was doing at first. The company was small, just a couple of guys with a battered work van and a lot of under-the-table jobs, but they were willing to take me on for $14 an hour, which at the time felt like a lifeline even though it barely covered gas and groceries. I was living on a friend's couch back then, cramming all my belongings into 2 duffel bags shoved behind his recliner, pretending like I did not notice when his girlfriend started giving me those long, uncomfortable stares that said I had overstayed my welcome even though they never said it outright. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that I just needed to get a few paychecks under my belt, and then I could get a place of my own. But with rent prices the way they were and $14 an hour disappearing faster than I could make it, temporary started stretching longer than I wanted to admit. Somewhere in the middle of all that, when everything felt like it was crumbling faster than I could patch it together, I found Buster. I was grabbing a terrible cup of gas station coffee after a long shift when I saw this scrawny brown mutt tied up next to a dumpster, shivering and looking like he had been out there for days. No collar, no tags, just these big sad eyes that hit me straight in the chest. I do not know what came over me, but I untied him, bundled him into my car, and just drove. I figured if nobody cared enough to come looking for him, then maybe he was meant to find me. Buster became my anchor in those days when everything else felt so damn unstable. He would curl up next to me on the couch at night, warm and solid, like a reminder that even if everything else fell apart, there was still something good in my life. I could come home from the worst job sites, covered in insulation dust and feeling like a failure, and he would be there wagging his tail like I was the best thing in the world. I honestly think I might not have made it through some of those nights without him. Having Buster gave me a reason to keep grinding, to keep pushing through the exhaustion and the bitterness and the endless weight of trying to rebuild a life from scratch with nothing but my own 2 hands. Even when I was barely keeping myself afloat, it seemed like my family never hesitated to come to me when they needed money, and like a fool, I always found a way to help. I paid for a new roof on my parents' house when the old one started leaking so badly that water stains were blooming across the ceilings and mold was creeping into the walls. It cost $7,500, more money than I had ever dropped on anything in my life up to that point. But they did not have it, and I could not stand the thought of them living like that. So I drained what little savings I had managed to scrape together after months of overtime and side jobs. Not long after that, my mother needed dental work that she had been putting off for years, the kind of work that could not wait anymore once the infections and pain started getting bad enough to keep her up at night. $5,000 later, her smile was fixed and her health was back on track, and everyone acted like it was just another thing that magically sorted itself out, not something that cost me months of financial stability and forced me to push back every personal plan I had yet again. Then there was Brandon, of course. Brandon, who came to me one night with big dreams and bright eyes, telling me he had this amazing opportunity to start a restaurant with a couple of his buddies, that all he needed was $4,000 to cover his share of the initial investment. He promised me it was a sure thing, that they had a great business plan and investors lined up, and it was just this tiny little gap in funding that was holding them back. Against my better judgment, Against every warning bell that went off in my head, I handed it over because he was my brother and because I wanted, just once, to believe that maybe he was ready to stand on his own 2 feet. That restaurant never even opened. Some zoning issue, or a permit they forgot to file, or maybe the whole thing was just a scam his friends were running. But whatever the excuse was, the money was gone. Brandon shrugged it off like it was no big deal, like it was just one of those things that happen when you chase your dreams, and the repayment, he promised me, never came. Neither did the repayments from my parents. Every dollar I gave them was treated like a gift, like something they were entitled to simply because I existed and had a little more than they did at the time. The thing is, I never gave them that money expecting grand displays of gratitude. I just wanted them to see me, really see me, and not just as the guy who showed up with his wallet open every time things went south. But that recognition never came either, and after a while, it became pretty clear that it never would. After years of grinding, saving every spare dollar, skipping vacations, nights out, even basic comforts, I was finally closing in on something that felt like a real future, my own place. It was not a mansion, not even a house. Just a modest one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, priced at $120,000. But to me, it might as well have been a castle. I had saved up nearly the entire down payment, the result of years of side gigs, overtime shifts, and sacrifices nobody in my family ever really seemed to notice or understand. I was weeks away from putting in an offer when everything fell apart. My father needed another surgery, complications from the first one, something that came up fast and left my parents scrambling again. They called me in a panic, said they had no way to cover it, that the insurance was only covering part of the procedure, and they didn't know what they were going to do. I was angry, not because they needed help, but because I already knew what was coming. They asked, I gave. I always gave. I wired the money over the same day, drained nearly my entire account, telling myself that there would be other apartments, other chances, and that my father's health was more important than a piece of property. But the part that crushed me, the part that still makes my stomach twist when I think about it, came a month later. I was visiting their house for dinner when I overheard them talking in the kitchen, laughing, casual, not even trying to keep their voices down. My mom said something about how Brandon was excited to get started on his new project, how he had a good feeling about this one. I froze, and I asked them what they were talking about. My dad smiled like it was no big deal and told me they had given Brandon $25,000 to help him launch another business idea. Some vague concept about an app and online marketing. Nothing with a real plan behind it. Nothing with any proof that it was going anywhere. I stood there in stunned silence, still reeling from the fact that the same people who had just emptied my savings to pay for emergency surgery somehow had 25 grand to hand over to Brandon like it was pocket change. They did not even ask me if I needed help rebuilding what I had lost. They did not say thank you. They did not offer to pay me back. They just watched me lose the only chance I had ever had to own something of my own, and then turned around and gifted Brandon a sum of money that could have finished the job for me twice over. It was not just about the money. It was about how easy it was for them to take everything I had built and reroute it without even blinking, while Brandon never had to ask twice. It was about realizing, once again, that no matter how hard I worked or how much I gave, I would always come second in a family that only seemed to value me when I was useful and forget me the moment I needed something in return. By the time New Year's Eve rolled around, I was hanging on to my sanity by a thread, but I still wanted to do something that felt normal, something that felt like family. So I decided to host a dinner in my tiny apartment, a cramped third-floor walk-up with peeling paint and a radiator that only worked when it felt like it. Because despite everything, some stupid part of me still believed maybe things could be different. I spent more than I should have, way more, buying steaks from the good butcher downtown, the kind that came wrapped in Rayolle paper instead of the shrink-wrapped supermarket kind. I wanted it to be special, even though I knew it would leave me scraping by for the next couple of weeks. The night started off okay. Everyone squeezed into my little place, laughing too loud and knocking into my rickety furniture, pretending like we were all one big happy family. I cooked the steaks perfectly, or at least as close to perfect as my ancient oven would allow, and for a little while, I let myself believe that maybe this was what I had been working toward all along, a night where everyone was together, where maybe the past did not matter as much. After dinner, when everyone was full and the plates were pushed aside, my parents stood up, clinking their wine glasses together like they were about to make a toast. I thought maybe they were going to thank me for hosting, maybe even acknowledge how much I had done to keep our family going all these years. But no, what came out of their mouths instead felt like getting punched in the chest. They announced, smiling like they were giving the best news in the world, that they had finalized their wills and that all their property, the house, the car, the savings, would go to Brandon. Every single thing. They said it so casually, like they were announcing what kind of dessert we would be having. My mom added, almost as an afterthought, that it made sense because Brandon had a family to support, and I, after all, had no family of my own. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Even Brandon, who usually never missed a beat, looked uncomfortable for a second before he covered it with a weak smile. I just sat there, staring at them, feeling like the floor had opened up under my chair. All the years of working myself to the bone, of sacrificing everything I had for them, and it did not even warrant a second thought. I was just the guy who filled in the gaps, the backup plan, the afterthought. And now, officially, the disposable one. I sat there for a moment after their announcement, trying to process what had just been said, my steak going cold on the plate in front of me while the wine in my glass suddenly tasted bitter. Everyone was still quiet, either out of shock or discomfort. I couldn't tell, but I knew that if I didn't speak then, if I let it slide like I had always done, I would never forgive myself. So I set my fork down, took a deep breath, and looked directly at my parents. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything or storm out. Instead, I calmly laid out every single fact they seemed so eager to forget. I reminded them that I had paid off nearly $40,000 of mortgage debt when they were on the brink of losing their house, the same house they were now leaving entirely to Brandon. I told them about the student loans I had taken over in their name because they couldn't handle the interest anymore, how for years I had been quietly making the payments they could not manage but never spoke about because I didn't want to shame them. Then I talked about Brandon. I talked about the $4,000 I gave him for that first failed restaurant attempt, and then the $25,000 he got handed after my father's second surgery, the surgery I had funded with the money I had spent years saving for my first home. I brought up the credit card debt they had shifted onto me when they claimed they couldn't handle the balance, how I spent months working double shifts to get it under control while they kept spending like nothing had changed. I laid it all out clearly, fact after fact, number after number, not out of spite, but because I needed them to finally hear it. I told them that they had used me like a second bank account, a dependable backup plan who never said no, and that I was done being that person. I told them there would be no more loans, no more quiet bailouts, no more rescuing them from financial holes they kept digging because they knew I'd always be there to fill them in. And when I finished, I told them plainly that they would not get anything more from me. Not a cent, not a favor, nothing. I wasn't angry in that moment, not the way they probably expected me to be. I was just empty, completely drained from years of carrying the weight they never acknowledged. I stood up, cleared my plate, and started collecting the dishes in silence while the rest of the room sat still, eyes wide, mouth shut, like they had just seen something crack that wasn't supposed to. But for me, it was not a crack. It was a release. The days that followed that dinner were some of the quietest and strangest I'd ever experienced, like the air had shifted and everything I'd known was suddenly suspended in an eerie calm. At first, there was complete silence, no calls, no texts, nothing, like they were still trying to figure out how to respond to me finally drawing the line after all these years. But it didn't take long before the silence broke. My mom was the first to reach out. She called late one night, her voice thick with tears, sobbing about how I had humiliated the family, how I had chosen to air private matters in front of everyone and ruin the holiday. She kept repeating that she didn't know things had felt so one-sided, as if my years of sacrifice had somehow gone unnoticed because I hadn't screamed about them loud enough. I listened for a minute, maybe two, until it became clear that her tears were more about guilt than understanding. She wasn't sorry for what had been done. She was sorry that I had dared to name it. Then Brandon started in. He didn't call. He sent messages, paragraphs filled with threats and insults, telling me I was dead to him, that I had always been jealous of him, that I had embarrassed him in front of everyone who mattered. He called me a coward, a traitor to the family, accused me of manipulating the situation to make him look bad. He said I was bitter because I had no wife, no kids, no future, just a stack of complaints and a chip on my shoulder. I didn't respond. I just let the messages keep coming until they stopped feeling like words and started sounding like static. My father finally called a few days later. No emotion in his voice, no hesitation. He just said I needed to behave like an adult and apologize for what I did. He said it like I had committed some minor infraction at a family barbecue instead of reaching the breaking point after decades of neglect and abuse. He told me that what I did was disrespectful and immature, that I had embarrassed him and made a scene like a child throwing a tantrum. There was no acknowledgement of what I'd said, no recognition of the truth behind it, just a stern voice demanding obedience like I was still some teenager under his roof. That was the moment I knew nothing was going to change, not for them. So I blocked them all. Every number, every account, every path they could use to get back in. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I hadn't known I was missing, silence that felt like peace. I started waking up without the pit in my stomach, without the dread of the next call or favor or guilt trip. I made coffee and drank it slow. I walked Buster in the early mornings and didn't have to rush anywhere. I didn't owe anyone anything anymore. For the first time, I wasn't surviving for them. I was finally living for me. After I cut ties with my family, it felt like a giant weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and for the first time, I could actually focus on building something real for myself. I went back and finished my night classes, those long, exhausting sessions where I would leave work, grab a bad cup of coffee, and sit in a freezing classroom until almost midnight. It wasn't easy balancing full-time work with school, but this time, every late night and early morning felt worth it because I was finally doing it for myself, not for anyone else's expectations. When I finally earned my degree, holding that piece of paper in my hand felt like reclaiming all the years I had sacrificed. I didn't even tell my parents. It wasn't about proving anything to them anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could survive everything they had thrown at me and still come out standing taller on the other side. Not long after that, I found a solid job as an engineer with a growing company that actually valued my work. The salary was more than anything I had ever made before, and for the first time, I had real money coming in, money that didn't disappear into someone else's problems. Around the same time, I started developing a side business with my old friend Nate. We had always tossed around ideas, but now we finally had the resources to bring something to life. We focused on smart home systems, security setups, automated lighting, energy management, things that people were starting to take seriously. It was slow at first, working out of Nate's cramped garage, doing installs on weekends and evenings, but the business started to pick up faster than either of us expected. Then there was Lindsay. We had met through mutual friends a few years back, but it wasn't until I got my life back on track that we really found each other. She was different from anyone I had ever known. Kind, patient, sharp as hell, and she never once made me feel like I had to earn her respect by bleeding myself dry. When she moved in with me, it wasn't some grand announcement or dramatic moment. One weekend, she just started bringing over more and more things, until it felt like she had always been there, filling the spaces that used to feel so cold and temporary with warmth and laughter and the kind of peace I didn't even know how badly I needed. We built our little world together, brick by brick. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't flashy, but it was ours. And after everything I had been through, that meant more to me than anything else in the world. It was about a year after I had completely cut them off when I heard through a mutual acquaintance that the bank had finally taken my parents' house. All those debts they had been ignoring or pushing onto me over the years had finally caught up with them, and there was no one left to bail them out. At first, I did not think much of it. I had spent so long being their safety net that I assumed, somewhere deep down, that they would find another way to land on their feet like they always had. But then, one afternoon, I heard a knock at my door. I looked through the window, and there they were, all three of them, my mom, my dad, and Brandon, standing awkwardly by an old, beat-up Corolla that looked like it had barely made it down the street. They were not dressed like the confident, dismissive people who used to sit at my dinner table and make casual announcements about cutting me out of the family. They looked small, worn down, and desperate, clutching old suitcases and garbage bags filled with who knows what. I opened the door, but did not invite them in. My mother started crying immediately, stumbling over her words, saying they had nowhere to go, that they just needed a place to stay for a little while. My dad stood stiff and silent, his pride visibly choking him, while Brandon kept his eyes on the ground like he was too ashamed to meet my gaze. They looked nothing like the people who had told me to apologize for standing up for myself. They looked like strangers. I listened. I let them plead. I let them lay out every excuse and every desperate promise about how things would be different this time. And then, without raising my voice or hesitating, I said no. I told them they had made their choices, just like I had made mine. I told them I had built a life without them and that they were not going to tear it down now that they had nowhere else to go. I closed the door while my mother sobbed, while my father muttered something under his breath, and while Brandon stayed silent. And when I locked the door behind me, standing in my warm, safe home, with Buster curled up on the couch and Lindsay laughing at something in the kitchen, I felt something I had never felt in my entire life. I felt real peace. I no longer feel guilty. That heaviness I used to carry around like a second skin, that constant pressure to give more, do more, be more for people who never gave anything back, it's gone. My energy, my time, my money, none of it is being poured into someone else's bottomless pit anymore. I'm not waking up in the middle of the night worried about someone else's bills, someone else's broken promises, someone else's mess that they expect me to clean up. I'm not racing to pick up the pieces for people who never once stopped to ask if I was okay. Now, every ounce of effort I put in goes into something that matters to me, into work I'm proud of, into a home that feels like mine, into the life I've built with Lindsay, into the peace I find walking Buster in the mornings, into quiet evenings with no unexpected calls demanding I give more. I'm not driven by obligation anymore. I'm driven by purpose, by self-respect, by a sense of worth that I had to find on my own because the people who should have taught me that never did. There's no more room in my life for users, for people who only show up with open hands and hollow words. I've learned the hard way what it costs to be the reliable one in a family that only remembers you when they need saving. That chapter is closed. I'm not bitter. I'm just done. And for the first time in my life, that feels like freedom. So what do you think? Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to be your support system? Would you have let them in or closed the door like I did? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell me how you would have handled it.